Undergrad at UB, living in University Heights, seeing a lot of issues with housing, just general sort of conditions of the neighborhood, and thinking, well, there's got to be something that we as a community can do. So the collaborative started, I think, sort of as that community counterweight to both the university and the city. So sort of having more community input on a lot of the things that were happening. So I got involved as an undergrad and was lucky enough, sort of through my involvement in the collaborative, and then also while working with the collaborative, helping to start the University Heights Tool Library. A lot of that work then was able to help me secure permanent employment working with the University District Community Development Association. So we're really lucky, I think, up in that corner of the city that there is a really strong civic infrastructure. Lots of community groups, lots of block clubs, and actually over the past couple of years, lots of communication across those different groups. And so I feel really lucky as a planner to be able to not only live in the community where I plan for, but also to be a board member of the University Heights Collaborative. So not only am I able to bring resources to the table, but also be able to hear, what's happening on the ground, what are people's needs, so that it's not just depending on, every 10 years we're doing a community needs assessment, which Erin did a very lovely job of. But hearing that sort of as it happens input and trying to develop strategies and initiatives to address some of those problems.
Awesome. So as we just saw the video from the Code for America Summit talking about justice, and so what were your reactions to that, to the presentation?
So I guess my initial reaction was just found my campaign for 2019, which is going to be sort of a clean slate campaign, because I feel like we're dancing all around that issue. Like we're working on bail reform and reducing arrest and incarceration and trying to get marijuana legalized, but like the foundation of those issues is like people being trapped into a place of reoffending, right? So people are released and we don't have the supports necessary for them to be able to gain meaningful employment and housing. And I think that the first step in that is record sealing, expungement, clean slate, so that people are able to move forward. So I appreciate the fact that Code for America is able to sort of fill that niche, and I can see the value of having something like that in Buffalo and Erie County.
And I don't have a ton of experience sort of on the social justice side, but I would say, understanding that, okay, we see this issue and we're trying to develop tools and strategies to address them, but when it's people who are, in the state capitol building or, super far removed from the actual problem that's happening, sometimes the solutions they're developing don't really meet the needs of the communities that they're trying to address. And so just as an example that I've come across, the state has these different funding opportunities. One in particular that we're actually currently administering a grant to help with commercial corridor revitalization. And it's based on this premise of it's a reimbursement program. So property owners can invest, $100,000 in their property, and the state reimburses 75% of those costs. But in a neighborhood that lacks capital and access to capital, if the property owner can't access that $100,000 loan to begin with, then the program is sort of rendered useless. So definitely appreciate how do we work as a community to develop solutions that not only in name address the issue, but also in implementation.
Yeah. And so, Darren, you do especially a lot of work with housing and dealing with landlords. You want to talk about some of the projects you're doing with that, and especially how some of the challenges and barriers that perhaps this use of technology might be able to help alleviate?
Sure. So I think 311 is a really powerful tool. When I learned as an undergrad that, wow, you can actually walk around and just report all these issues to the city and something's going to happen. That was pretty powerful. It was really empowering as a citizen to know that you were sort of on the front line of making things happen. But I think where a lot of community apathy comes from is when you're reporting the same issue over and over and over again and you're not necessarily getting any results. So again, the tool is only as good, I guess, as the results you're seeing from it. So I think data has a big role to play in not only, okay, you're submitting the 311 and they're saying this has been referred to housing court and that's sort of the end of the story, but, well, when is this landlord set to appear? How can we as a community turn out and advocate, especially if it's someone who owns, 40, 50 properties in a neighborhood? How can we advocate for ourselves so that the judge isn't just, oh, we're gonna dismiss this, you've got another 30 days, continually until, either the home is at a state where, it's not livable and it's gonna take $100,000 to renovate, or to a point where, community members who were once engaged and invested are no longer, seeing any sort of reason to do that. And so I would love to find a way to use 311 data, and I know we've sort of, there's been a lot of work around that to actually sort of take some preemptive steps. So identifying, I call it like a top 10 hit list. Basically like large property owners in university districts who have numerous housing code violations. So identifying those individuals, and that proves difficult because most houses are owned as LLCs, so you're not going to know which owner owns which LLC and how they're connected. So using data to sort of make those connections and figure out, okay, this person owns 50 properties even though, there's 24 LLCs sort of mixed in there. And then developing strategies on how are we going to approach this, landlord. Maybe there's opportunities to actually assist him if, there's an issue with access to capital. Or, maybe there's an opportunity to launch a shame campaign. I have a friend working in Youngstown, Ohio, where they have out-of-town landlords who are entering into these predatory rent-to-own sort of arrangements, and they've actually bussed, an entire busload of neighborhood folks and community members to in front of these people's homes with huge banners basically saying, this is unacceptable, you can't do this in our community. So I don't know if it would get to that level, but just having that data available and knowing, these are the issues, how can we begin to develop strategies?
Yeah, and I think that really shows a good point that it's not enough to just have a, just an app, or even just having the data available. That's not gonna work. Even if it's good data, or even if the app is well coded, that's not what makes it work. What makes it work is the people organizing around it. Right. And especially you raise a good example about like the strategy component of that. And India, I know you at Open Buffalo, you guys have done a lot of strategic community organizing around issues, especially in the Fruit Belt, but also in dealing with the Buffalo Police Department and everything. Do you want to just share about like kind of what that approach has been like, and some of the challenges you've run into and how you overcome them?
Sure. So, as I said before, we really try and center impacted and marginalized community at the forefront of the work that we do. In the Fruit Belt, we've always made sure that as decisions are made, that the Fruit Belt residents and leadership have a consensus, right? So before I worked for Open Buffalo, my involvement with Open Buffalo was actually as a Fruit Belt resident, and we always needed a 3/4 consensus from people who actually lived in the neighborhood before we went forward with any strategy or tactic. I would say that like the biggest challenge is political will for us when it comes to doing anything that is social justice related, because, and this is gonna sound, all right, well, whatever, I'm just gonna say it. So we live in the age of neoliberalism, and like what is considered progressive is not actually progressive. There's sort of this guise of like New York State and Buffalo is like really blue and like cares about people, and that's not the experience that people, especially east of Main Street, are having. So I think that like the most important thing that we have been able to do is really control the narrative and tell our stories from our perspective and like get lots of media attention and community support around what we are actually experiencing. Because when I started this work in 2015, it was like gentrification is not a thing, like you people are crazy, this is Buffalo and definitely not Brooklyn, like this is not a big city, people are not being displaced. You know, the parking, we couldn't necessarily prove it was an issue, but once we started like really controlling the story, controlling our own sources of media, like doing all of our social media campaigns and things like that, I feel like the paradigm really began to shift. And it was in that we were able to form strategic partnerships with people in City Hall, like Council President Pridgeon, that really sort of created the political will to make certain things happen. And you see that locally with the Fruit Belt work. And I would say that on a state level, the work that we've seen surrounding marijuana reform and the potential legalization is shocking even to me. Because when we started on that campaign, you know, we were still having like that gateway conversation, right? And now people are saying like, actually, marijuana is an exit drug. When we're facing this health crisis that is the opioid epidemic, marijuana is a much less harmful substance. Black and white people use at similar rates recreationally, and we brought forward the conversation into like everyday kitchen table talk about like how Black and brown people are disproportionately arrested, incarcerated, and punished for things that other people are able to do with impunity. So, you know, it's really exciting things happening. And just moving forward, like the conversation about marijuana legalization and people who have records for possession, even a low level arrest can affect someone's ability to secure housing, financial aid, and employment. So making sure that there are easy ways for people to get those convictions expunged is extremely important. And I think that I've spoke before about like a lot of what people are experiencing we can't necessarily prove, right? So because of community violence in our neighborhood recently, we've seen sort of this resurgence of occupation by police forces. We're currently being patrolled by Buffalo Police Department, NFTA Transit Police, even though there's no bus routes through our neighborhood, Roswell Security,
State Sheriff's Office.
the Sheriff's Office.
State Police.
Right, so I ride through my neighborhood at night and I see young people being pulled over and harassed and accosted. And while we know that like the police should uphold the law, it shouldn't be in a way that targets certain people because you're just under suspicion because of the way you look. And we still have not found that like broken window policing and those sort of strategies actually reduce crime. And you know, people talking about reviving strike force, they didn't take guns off the street. They weren't making meaningful arrests. By and large, all they did was give traffic citations. So, in my dream world, not only would we be able to sort of get data from specific police districts on who they are arresting and for what reason and demographic data. What we get from the state is just like City of Buffalo. They don't separate it out by district. But also like my biggest dream would be some sort of platform where people could self-report police stops. Like where you were, what time of day it was. If you can get the officer information, that would be great, but they're not necessarily forthcoming with it. But like, you know, self-report the stop, the reason you were given for the stop, how old you are, your race, you know, like I said, the time of day, day of the week, because all of those things matter sometimes, whether it was the beginning of the month or the end of the month, you see spikes in traffic stops. So, yeah, and then there was something else I had in here. Oh, I saw on someone else's open data platform, maybe Austin or Greenville, South Carolina.
body cameras?
No, misconduct complaints are
Yeah.
like open to the public, so if you report police misconduct, other
Oh,
people
yeah.
can see that. But New
Yeah, I
York
definitely
State
see
has a
that.
law that protects our police from releasing any sort of like disciplinary information against them, which I don't understand because they're public servants, and like if you're not serving the public, then what you do wrong should be public information, right? I'm a nurse. If I do something that is not within the code of conduct according to my license, that is a matter of public record for New York State, so that if I'm going to take a job or take care of a person, they can look up and see like, hey, like, are you not a good nurse? And I think that like police are public servants, we pay them to act in the public interest. So if they're not doing things appropriately, that should also be public information, but like that's a part of a larger discussion,
Yeah.
like legislation, getting laws changed and stuff. But that was just some of the things that
Yeah.
I was thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely raised a lot of good points, and so one of the things, kind of the overarching mission for Code for America, is government of the people, by the people, and I think by the people is a really powerful phrase that we don't actually kind of think about that often. That it is a collaborative model. That if people want to get engaged, then we have to show up. But then we've also heard like a lot in this day and age that people are very distrustful of the government because of a lot of wrong deeds that have been done and a breakdown of trust, and then also political apathy as well. So I guess for both of you, how do you and your organization navigate that thing of distrust and apathy while also collaborating with government? It's a big question there.
Yeah, I feel like with the multiple hats I wear, there's sort of like a different relationship
Yeah.
with each one of them. So like, I feel like with the tool library, I won't say it's necessarily confrontational, but it's a little more like ask for forgiveness and not permission. So seeing where there are gaps in leadership coming from the public sector, and basically just, you know, developing a project or initiative that sort of fills that gap. And so one project that everyone I think with some Heights background knows about is Retreat the District. And one of the things that we had to start with at the beginning was, okay, we know that that this neighborhood is in desperate need of trees, but where exactly are they needed and to what extent? And the city hadn't updated its tree inventory since 2001, and it was 2014. So in between that, we had lost about 30,000 trees in the October storm. So figuring out, you know, where are we going to plant? And again, thanks to some intrepid community members, including Aaron, we were able to build basically an online mapping platform using smartphones where people could walk down a street and say, there's a tree here, there isn't a tree here, there's a fire hydrant here. And so, you know, over the course of the summer, we were able to basically map most of the heights, and I forget exactly how many data points it was, but like,
It's like, I want to say like over 3,000,
Yeah.
3,500.
so basically what we ended up with at the end of the day was this geocoded, openly accessible Google map where people could actually click on each point and they would be able to find out, you know, what was happening there. And so in that sort of relationship, the city was at first like, hey, you can't do that. That's
You
like,
can't create your own data.
That's-
That's basically what they said.
yeah, like that's proprietary area, like hands off, and then realizing that, okay, wow, I guess community can actually generate data that is not only accurate, but is also usable and is being acted on. And so a couple of years later, they launched their own sort of re-inventorying of the entire city, and now they have a really great sort of user-friendly, graphically based, it's called My Tree Keeper. And not only does it have geolocated trees, but it also has how much, you know, CO2 are these trees responsible for removing, what's the value added to the city. So lots of really great data. And, you know, would they have done that as soon as they did had we not sort of been that provocateur, like,
Yeah.
I don't know, but I think that's
It's definitely a balance. So.
yeah, so that was a really interesting, I think, relationship that developed out of that project. And again, it's centered around this idea of data and who owns it, who can create it, who can use it, that sort of thing. And you know, I always look for opportunities to collaborate, not only with the city, but also being a university district. Of course, we have the university right there as well, so tapping into those resources as well. I'm trying to think of some other good examples, but maybe I'll toss it over to you. Continue to brainstorm.
Sure. So, I guess my personal philosophy is that, like, we are all qualified to govern, and that the best ideas come from impacted people, and sometimes we might need like technical assistance to make those things a reality, but that's okay, and that is what government should be. We shouldn't be leaving it up to professional politicians to decide what's best for our communities. I believe that elected officials are delegates or representatives who are supposed to carry out the wishes of the people they serve, not to be the one to determine what is best for the people they serve. And I guess a great example of sort of a great city and community collabo is the land trust. So the city's data on the inventory of land was not very accurate when we were trying to determine like how much city-owned land was in the fruit belt around the time that the moratorium was established. So similarly, but a little bit less techy than how you guys did, we had a group of volunteers just go out and sort of inventory all of the vacant lots, determine which ones were privately owned, which ones were city-owned, get dimensions on which ones are buildable and which ones are not, which allowed us to sort of create a strategy around the lots that we wanted to acquire from the city for development. And then, like I said, through this awesome partnership that we have with Council President Darren Pridgeon, we've been allocated 20 lots to begin with, which is about 10% of the city inventory in the area that is the fruit belt. But really looking forward to sort of duplicating that model for other neighborhoods that have like swaths of vacant land who are under threat of displacement and gentrification, so that ultimately the community can decide how development occurs. And you know, at Open Buffalo, we also have a philosophy of deep democracy, which means that everyone gets an equal say, even if you are not able to vote formally, that there is someone who should be carrying what's important to you forward. And that economics does not mean that the management of finances, but it actually means the management of home, and how we all care for one another.
I thought of another example.
Yeah, sure.
So one of the primary functions of the University District CDA is to sort of be a pass-through for city community development block grant funds. So basically, biannually we're given a set number of, they call them slots, for emergency home repairs. So basically this means if someone's roof is like basically caving in, or their chimney is about to collapse, or they're having issues with their main electrical panel, and they meet this certain set of criteria, we can go in, basically either give them an unconditional grant or sort of a 50% payback period over 10 years. And I think the UDCDA's role in that program, especially thinking about things like data, is being that advocate, that community advocate. So we service both university and Delaware districts, which, if people are familiar with both, I think understand that there are totally different needs and totally different levels of needs, and yet we somehow still get the same number of slots for both communities. So being able to take, 311 data especially, and say there just isn't the same level of need in this community versus this community, is there any way that, maybe we only need 10 slots in Delaware District, and then maybe we need 30 slots in University District, and also just, again, advocating that maybe how they're forming the programs aren't necessarily meeting the needs on the ground. So there's a very specific number of repairs that can be made, and we get countless calls every day saying, you know, oh, well, I have an issue with my foundation, or I have an issue with asbestos in my basement, and I think it's affecting the health of my family. And unfortunately, you know, we don't have grant products that meet any of those things. But if we're able to go to the city and say, you know, hey, over the past year, 311 violations for this issue, you know, we saw a 60% increase over this timeline in this specific neighborhood. Why don't we tailor some sort of grant product to meet those needs? I think data really helps us become that advocate and take those needs to City Hall and hopefully begin to make sure that the resources are actually beginning to meet some of those needs.
Yeah, I think both of you shared really great examples of why it's so important to engage the community because they truly know the issues and this year's actual theme of National Day of Civic Hacking is government by the people, and so really great examples of that. So I think we're gonna start wrapping up, and then we'll move into lunch. But for the final, final thoughts, sharing what would be, Indy, you already gave a few examples of what you'd like to see, but basically sharing the top things on your wish list in this whole civic tech and open data space. And then also what advice you would give to Coach Buffalo in building up this civic infrastructure that you two have been so successful in your own organizations.
So, like I said, my big dream is some sort of like self-reporting app for stops. I think that will be like super useful, and I think that the community would really be excited about that. I know there had been a Facebook page like to report checkpoints or something, but I think that would be something really exciting to see. And the other question was, about community engagement.
Yeah,
and
basically
Code for
building up.
Buffalo.
Yeah.
So I would say that the best advice that I would have being an organizer is that spaces like this, people like me are absent from because we don't feel like it's accessible. So the most important thing that you can do is take this into the community. You have to like meet people where they're at, and I would say that like a lot of times for people whose basic needs are not met, often they don't even have the brain space to think about doing something extra. So I mean, taking into account simple things like childcare, transportation, food, all of the small things that keep people from being able to participate in a meaningful way, being able to sort of fill those gaps, and also just go out and knock on somebody's door like, hey, I'm Mike, I'm doing this cool thing called Code for Buffalo, like I'm a computer nerd, but I want to know like how I can use my computer nerd skills to like help you out with whatever it is that you feel like is needed in your community. I think that building those one-to-one relationships gets you a lot further than just like a blanket flyering or Facebook event if you really want to reach the people who things are important to.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think my two answers are kind of connected in this idea of participatory budgeting, which I think a lot of people want to see the city engage in, and again, how do we get people involved in decision-making processes? I think being able to spend money in their own communities is a really powerful way to do that. And so if there's a way to connect sort of data-informed decision-making with participatory budgeting, so maybe on an annual basis there is sort of this civic hackathon or some sort of civic innovation challenge where we're basically saying, based on the data, here's sort of like a snapshot of different communities. Here's the starting point. Here's ground zero. We have this pot of $5 million to allocate across the city. How can we begin to develop, working with block clubs, working with, housing agencies? How do we begin to create sort of projects and initiatives that begin to meet some of those needs and issues, and I think that would be, I mean, even in the University Heights neighborhood, we got a $15,000 donation from Joe Dash, sort of as like, I look at it kind of as blood money, but we might as well use it, right? But basically, you know, we could have used that money however we wanted, and we said, well, we just got this brand new rail trail that the community has been fighting for the past 10 years. So let's earmark this money for this major investment and say, you know, continue the engagement and say, community, you know, we have basically the foundation laid. How do we want to see this space continue to grow and evolve? And it's been really great. Some of the projects have already been off the ground. So, you know, we have Candy Hayes with the Heath Street Walk Club saying people are always letting their dogs crap all over the park. So now we have like 2 doggy doo-doo stations down there that were funded through participatory budgeting. So even small things like that, I think can really add up and can be an exciting example of what data can do. And then something else that I just wrote down this morning was looking at things like the interim auction, which I think has become more sort of an opportunity for like speculators and predatory investors to say, oh, how many properties can I snatch up this year, and reposition it as an opportunity for first-time home buyers to actually, you know, buy into the city. And something, you know, that I hope the city would take into consideration is before someone, you know, buys one of these properties, do a basic search, and if they have any open housing code violations on any other property that they own, like, they immediately become disqualified. And I think that would go a long way in actually getting, you know, people who are going to be bought into the neighborhoods that they're purchasing these homes. So that would kind of be pretty high up on my wish list.
Awesome.
Good.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely some good examples of cities out there that are working in that space, and especially in regard to like creating a blacklist for predatory home buyers and such. So so thank you, India and Darren, so much.